Story 1. I cheated on my finals, which allowed me to graduate. It is what many call an open secret, but it is definitely not a voluntary one, and I do not know what would come next if it were more open. Story 2. I thought it was a good idea to get on a trampoline on stilts at a friend's house. I stepped onto the first stilt and put my weight on it, and then I decided it was a bad idea. So I took my foot off and accidentally hit my eyebrow, which required stitches. Story 3. I had a wild night with a group of Yakuza in Okinawa and was practically compelled to sing Green Day at karaoke with them until 5 a.m. because they said I resembled the lead singer. Story 4. I entered a wet t-shirt contest on vacation, just wearing a pair of bikini bottoms and a white t-shirt. Story 5. Found a massive cannabis crop, went back at night and filled my car with cannabis. Drove through town and got home to realize I had a cannabis leaf covering my number plate. I dried it in the attic at my parents' house and sold it in one lump to some sketchy individuals. Then went on to pay my first year's university fees. Story 6. My friends and I went to a local stream where people swam, and trying to look cool, I told them that if they jumped off the 30 to 40-foot bridge into the water, I would too. That day, all my friends jumped off the bridge, so then I did as well. I also won a hairy nipple contest. Story 7. I sneaked into an abandoned hospital with my disposable camera, thinking I would get some cool, artistic shots. I ended up finding a group of drama students filming a zombie movie and got cast as an extra. I still have the fake blood-stained shirt somewhere. Story 8. 18th birthday. My friends and I decided to take some pills, I do not know what they were, and drink a bottle of vodka. My best friend had a GoPro with him. I woke up the next day not remembering anything. We played back the footage once we all woke up and found out that at some point in the night, we broke into an abandoned building in our area that was full of paper and lit it on fire. People were talking about it for days, and we all just pretended to have no clue what happened. Not my proudest moments, but watching that footage back, it amazed me how quickly the whole thing caught fire. Story 9. I played my parents' racism against Barack Obama for failing classes. I failed a college class and lost my academic loans. I had to get my parents to reapply for new loans and thought I was going to get in serious trouble for failing. This was right when Barack Obama got elected. So I faked a letter from the Department of Education stating that because my parents made too much money, I was losing my student loans. I impersonated the United States government to play off my dad's racism to cover up my failing grades. I am 34 and still haven't told them. Story 10. I rejected all my university offers and decided to rely on an apprenticeship, which I wasn't guaranteed to get. I ended up working and investing since then, and now at 21, I am doing very well financially with no debt. For me, it was the biggest risk I have ever taken, and everyone doubted my decision. Story 11. Jumped off multiple bridges into water. Nearly drowned the second time due to injuring my right arm on impact. Story 12. Taking care of dad's death certificate, juggling through my own grief, and providing emotionally and financially for mom. It was crazy to think I managed to hold on and didn't take my own life. Story 13. I drove my two-door Honda Civic 3 hours through 12 inches of snow to go snowboarding during a blizzard. We received an additional 16 inches while we were on the mountain. The round trip usually takes about 3.5 hours. We drove for about 7 hours that day. Story 14. I got a girl pregnant. We had an abortion, but the crazy part is she got pregnant not even a full year after. Story 15. I went off my medications. I was diagnosed and prescribed medications for bipolar disorder. I stopped taking them when I turned 18. It was a cold turkey withdrawal, and I experienced horrible side effects. I cannot remember much from ages 15 to 19, just brief glimpses. I would not recommend it. I am clean and sober now, not taking any medications, and I am doing great. Story 16. I ran out of my girlfriend's house while her family was chasing me. I stole oil from teachers' bikes and had a fight with the security guard at the 43 bus stand in Chandigarh. I was hiding from 2 police cars while they were chasing me for crossing a red light. I spent time at my friend's hostel and attended class as well. Story 17. I applied for a job at a fancy restaurant just to get closer to this cute waiter. I got hired, worked there for 2 weeks, and then found out he had a girlfriend. I quit immediately but ended up becoming really good friends with the chef who taught me how to make amazing risotto. Story 18. The craziest and dumbest thing I did was run from the police with my 17-year-old girlfriend on a sport bike in Mexico. Of course. Story 19. Climbed up to join the celebration on the day the Berlin Wall fell. It was winter and I didn't take a coat. The night before, my friends and I went to Potsdamer Straße to throw rocks at the East German Guard Tower. Story 20. Joined an online brainstorming group. It was the peak of COVID-19 at that time. Better one is this. Read novels for more than 10 hours per day. Story 21. I went on a personal exploration because I was finally of age and had issues with romantic relationships being conflated with physical intimacy. Honestly, I don't remember most of the experiences with those much older men, and I was taken advantage of a few times, as I didn't know I could say no or change my mind back then. I had older men picking me up from high school to take me to motels after class. Story 22. I will admit I was a bit on the promiscuous side. Just a bit though, not an outright promiscuous person or anything, but I slept with a few guys that year. I got in cars with people I didn't know and went to houses where I wasn't familiar. It was a very crazy time back then. By some miracle, I never ended up pregnant or with any kind of disease, or dead in a ditch or orange grove. Story 23. Confessing my love to a bus driver. I was incredibly brave back then. I would never do something like that again nowadays, as I am turning 30 this year. Story 24. Not 18, but 20. I jumped from a 338 feet bridge. Oh, it was bungee jumping, I believe English speakers call it. Story 25. I live in Western Pennsylvania, and it was New Year's Eve. A few friends and I were trying to figure out what we were going to do that night. At the last second, we decided to drive to New York City to watch the ball drop, which was about 7 hours away. We had no plans besides driving there, parking, watching the ball drop, and then driving home. It was a nightmare getting anywhere near the city. We walked forever to get even somewhat close, where we could barely see the ball. Then we drove home. I wouldn't recommend it. This was New Year's Eve 2004. Story 26. Moved from a place where the drinking age was 19 to a place where the drinking age was 18. Those first few months were filled with drunken nonsense with some friends and my girlfriend out of high school. I tell you what. Story 27. From the age of 17 to 19, I used to love urban exploration a lot. I probably climbed a crane while drunk just to see the view from above. I did a lot of crazy and stupid things, but this one sounds the best. Story 28. Basic training probably, plus everything thereafter as a consequence of that decision, at least for the following 8 years. Story 29. Not really crazy, but when I turned 18, I wanted to buy alcohol legally at the grocery store. When the moment came where the cashier should have asked for my ID, he didn't say anything. I tried for several months before that, and each time I couldn't because they asked for it. It really broke me because I wanted to be like, ha, I'm old enough. Story 30. I spent quite a lot of time on a motorbike in shorts. I knew then that it was unwise, but I was 18 and felt indestructible. I hitchhiked a lot as well. Mosh pits were common experiences for me too. Story 31. I took out student loans thinking my future self would figure it out. My future self is currently crying. Story 32. I spent 9 months hitchhiking down the west coast of the United States. I had a backpack, 2 changes of clothes, and $40. Story 33. I took my parents' car and drove half the night around the city. I didn't know how to drive, but it was cool and nothing bad happened. Story 34. I ran from the police. I was going way too fast on a semi-rural road, went over a crest, and a police officer was coming from the other direction. I saw him activate his lights and hit the brakes just as he went over the crest in the opposing direction. My friend said to accelerate, so I did. This was a mid-1990s economy car, so it wasn't fast and didn't handle well at all. We knew of a house coming up that had a long driveway and sat off the road a ways, so I turned right onto the property and parked behind the garage. I turned off the car, and we sat there for about 30 minutes. Luckily, either no one was home, or they didn't notice us. I started the car, drove back to the road, and carried on with our afternoon while driving at the speed limit, of course. I told no one, but now you all know. Story 35. Stole a traffic cone with a blinking light, dressed it up, called it Flash, went to McDonald's drive-thru with the cone at the wheel, and one of our friends crouched below to actually drive and tried to order. We were foolish. Story 36. A group of us broke into our town's public pool by climbing over the tall metal fence, which hurt, and went skinny dipping. Story 37. Said, forget it. Left my university, and signed up for mandatory military conscription. For context, I was the best student in my class by far, and I was definitely not built for the army, skinny, non-athletic, and with a generally bad attitude towards all things military. The logic was that the sooner I underwent this service, the sooner I would be able to live my life without the worry of it in the future. Story 38. 16 to 20 was just lots of drunken and stoned adventures. Exploring abandoned buildings, getting chased by police, farmers, and other people. Exploring places we shouldn't be going, like construction sites and a quarry. Climbing anything we could even attempt to. Just being very stupid and reckless teenagers. Story 39. I was 19, but I had an inappropriate relationship with the married school resource officer of the school where I was interning. Then 3 years later, after I graduated from college, I ended up teaching at that same school, where he was still employed as the school resource officer, and we started a relationship again. I ended up being his daughter's teacher. Honestly, it was the best experience of my life, but I probably do not recommend it for a variety of reasons. Story 40. I drove incredibly recklessly in a vehicle that was far too powerful at speeds that were very illegal. I also experimented with a lot of drugs and engaged in a lot of unprotected sex. Story 41. I took ecstasy at school. My friend, who is male and identifies as gay, came to a class wearing a wig, and then we left during lunch. It was a girls' school. Story 42. I jumped out of an airplane at 3,000 feet with a parachute attached by a static line to pull the ripcord for me. It was the single scariest thing I have ever done, before or since. Story 43. I had never left the country but always wanted to. I took a job as an au pair in Turkey for 3 months, 2 days after graduating high school. I found the job on a random website and spoke to the mom once over Zoom, and then hopped on a plane. I am from a super small United States town with little diversity, so it was a huge culture shock. They were the nicest people ever, and I had an amazing experience, but the older I get, the more I recognize this could have easily not been a great situation. Story 44. Toured the country with the Grateful Dead, but it was later, for example, Rat Dog and Phil and Friends and all roads in between. Story 45. I hopped on a motorcycle with a complete stranger. My dorm mate called me and said, "Hey, I met some guys with motorcycles. Do you want to go for a ride?" Our decision was not very wise, as we allowed 2 unfamiliar men to give us a motorcycle ride around town, and we did so without informing anyone about what we were doing. Story 46. I chased a rabbit around a school field in my truck. I did not catch that rabbit and never intended any harm, just the chase. Story 47. Midlife crises involve a lot of conflicts, and I faced challenges along the way. I bought several trucks, a couple of cars, a four-wheeler, a bike, and spent everything in different states. I realized, hey, I am only 19 now, not 56. I settled down a bit. I am still young at 24 though, and I am doing great now. I just have to remember how things went during that time. Felt like I completely lost my identity. Story 48. Every time I tell people what I did on my 18th birthday, they freak out and call me crazy. They wonder if something is wrong with me, if I do not have any friends, and what is wrong with my family. I was out on the farm planting potatoes. It was not much, but hey, it was honest work. Story 49. I do not know if it is the craziest, but I took a mostly empty keg from outside of a bar. I am guessing they were using it to prop open the doors, and then when someone got cold, they probably shut the doors with the keg still outside. It was about 1/3 full, and luckily I was driving my dad's pickup, so it came home with me. Story 50. Flew from Pennsylvania to California for lunch, and then got back on the plane. In 2 hours, I will return home. Story 51. I put myself in a lot of very dangerous situations because I wanted to be raped. Nothing ever happened, either because my methods made people think it was a trap, or because I live in a very safe city, or maybe I am just too ugly, but I really wanted it to. Story 52. When I turned 18, I was working in a car showroom with a group of friends. On my birthday, I was stripped, duct taped to an office chair, and had pictures stuck all over me. They then wheeled me onto Baker Street in West London and left me there. Luckily, a fireman's parade came past, and after a lot of laughing, they helped me out. I am still friends with all of them, and this was over 20 years ago. Story 53. A man offered to tie my shoelaces for me while I was intoxicated, and he crouched down to do it. I can never get that moment out of my thoughts. Story 54. Not really my fault, just my clumsiness, but I tried learning medieval fencing. I failed to catch a stick that was thrown to me and broke 2 teeth. Story 55. I got drunk after just 2 shots of vodka because I was on antidepressants and didn't know they affect how quickly you get drunk. They should teach this in schools, to be honest. The same applies to other medications. Story 56. I decided to go all out and went skydiving. I have to say it was one of the most amazing highlights of my life. It was something that I had always wanted to do, and when I finally did it, I had no regrets. Now I am looking forward to more exhilarating and bone-chilling experiences. Maybe I should try diving with the sharks. That sounds fun. Story 57. I met a boy online who used scripture to make me believe we were meant to be together. We chatted, and I turned 19, and then I almost went to Nigeria. Gideon was his name. This was in 2003 or 2004. I wanted to be loved so much that I had no idea what I was doing. The next year, I bought a plane ticket for $2,000 but borrowed money from my sister. Then I found out I shouldn't go as I received wisdom from a leader at my church. I also didn't have money to pay my sister back, and it was her wedding money. I canceled the ticket with the excuse of something, and they refunded it. That was a miracle. I didn't have a visa and would have had to return had I gone. Story 58. I moved in with a man I had been talking to for 2 months. We have been married for 9 years this coming May. I am still madly and deeply in love with the goof. Story 59. I went on a spring break trip to Panama City Beach. Only a year earlier, I had never even tried marijuana or alcohol. I really leaned into the sociability of it all, as I had always experienced social anxiety in high school. Story 60. College. Without pesky parents in the way, I finally got to do what I couldn't do while living under their roof, which was order Domino's pizza at midnight while my friends and I played StarCraft. Story 61. This guy in his 30s, he was about 36, I think. Anyway, I was his side chick for a while, which then turned into me being his submissive. When his wife found out, I became more of their plaything. They kept me high and wet and are probably why I am such a flirt now. Story 62. I turned 18 a month into my senior year of high school and was already living in a trashed house with some guys I knew from my part-time job. I decided that since literally no one in my family knew or cared if I was going to school anyway, I would just take a full-time job instead. School wouldn't let me sign myself out permanently, so I racked up absences while also making decent money for a kid in 2009. Eventually, my mother figured everything out, and I had to cram all of my missed schoolwork into 2 months in order to graduate because suddenly she cared. Story 63. From the 17th to the 19th, I rode an unregistered supermoto and dirt bike on the street and off-road. I didn't even have the right license for it. I had a few encounters with the police. I ran off, but there were no chases. Nothing serious ever happened in the whole 2 years of basically riding every weekend, aside from some bruises from falling. Looking back at some of the things that happened, I realized I was so lucky I didn't get caught or, worse, die because I was driving recklessly, like pulling wheelies at over 100 kilometers per hour. Story 64. I called out a college professor for a lack of professionalism when it came to individuals like me who are autistic. I stormed out of the classroom. However, unlike in my high school years, no one followed me. The professor did eventually track me down to apologize for what happened. She learned how poorly students like me were treated because they were seen as at risk, and little care was provided despite medical evaluations. I learned what a double standard is because we were both adults and could try diplomacy. Story 65. I had a foursome with 3 other girls, outran the police, used cocaine, got arrested 3 times for 2 felonies, drove at high speeds, went to jail twice, drove 1,200 miles while under the influence of acid, and jumped off a 100-foot cliff in a quarry. It was an eventful year. Story 66. I grinded in the witch's castle in Secret of Mana so that I could beat the spiky tiger at level 92. Took about 3 months. I was supposed to be looking for a job. Story 67. I went to the Harry Potter midnight launch. I wasn't allowed out after 4 p.m. I certainly wasn't allowed to see people outside of school. I told my mom not to pick me up after the Girl Guides group let out, and I went to the pub to find some of my peers. Then we queued up for the book. I was home by 12:30 a.m., and she was incredibly upset. I also went to my 6th form leavers ball. She was absolutely furious about that one. Story 68. I was 19, but I packed up my Ford Explorer, got my dog and my best friend, dropped out of college, and drove from Florida to California without telling any other friends or my parents. Story 69. Became legally allowed to drink, drive, and engage in consensual relations with individuals older than myself without them becoming criminals. And I did all that at once. Story 70. When I was 18, I was caught in a restaurant restroom with my boyfriend while we were enjoying some physical affection there. Story 71. Topless boxing at a fraternity house after a keg party. It's amazing I was never assaulted. I think they all recognized that I was out of my mind. Story 72. I faked autism to a particular doctor just to get a dose of Adderall. She believed me, and I started selling the pills to my friends studying for their college entrance exams. Story 73. I had a gathering of 6 people in my parents' house while they were still there. Honestly, it didn't start off as a casual meeting, but I definitely do not have the courage to do anything like that again now. I had to turn the music up to full volume to mask all the noise, as if that would help the situation at all. Story 74. Another one. I was working as a teacher and supervisor at my old high school after I graduated. I think I was 19 by then, so my friends who were still in school were doing tests and exams that I was marking and recording myself. My best friend to date couldn't, for the life of him, get past a certain few math papers, so I would always call him in and have him write in the correct answers in his handwriting so I could pass him. Not only that, when we would go out drinking or for sleepovers, I would write formal letters to their parents with the school stamp, watermark, and everything, stating that we were having a mandatory overnight event that all students had to attend, just so we could have a night out despite the usual protests of the stricter parents. Good times. Story 75. Many things. I was big into racing mountain bikes at the time and did some pretty crazy stuff on them. Of note, a 10-foot straight drop onto a parking lot. Going 80 kilometers per hour through a technical section of a race course. That one was crazier than it sounds. Climbing a wall of ice 3 stories tall with no gear or safety harness. I'm sure I've forgotten a lot of the crazy stuff I did as a kid. I was an adrenaline junkie. Story 76. I met a man I had been chatting with in an online chat room from Vampire Freaks. I still kick myself for being so foolish, but I am also very grateful that he turned out to be a lovely person who was exactly who he claimed to be. Story 77. I decided to celebrate my 19th birthday with almost 36 hours of work, moving from one job to the next and back again. I was foolish. Story 78. I spent 1 year preparing for my 2nd college entrance exam, but in the end, I scored 50 points lower than the first time out of a total of 480 points. Story 79. Not the craziest, but the most memorable. I drove to a concert in Ljubljana to see Steve Coleman and his 8-piece band. I got to meet them afterward, enjoyed drinks with a mime, and then took the car to drive back home, which was about 250 kilometers away. I failed to make it home and woke up on my car roof at sunrise. Story 80. I was working, and I fell into the entanglements of someone older, my supervisor, who was supposedly going to get divorced and was with his wife only for the children. We had an affair, and a friend helped me open my eyes to the fact that he was never going to leave her. I left him and was left with the burden of conscience that I was that man's lover. Story 81. I ran 4 miles home in the nude at 4:30 in the afternoon in the summer with a girl for a pint of Stella. Middlesbrough, Acklam, Thornaby. Story 82. I was a chauffeur for a sex worker one time, but I only did it once because one of her clients hit on me, and it was very creepy. The sex worker was really nice and protective of me though. Story 83. Dated a 37-year-old with 4 children, and the oldest was 6 years younger than I. Found out he was a sexual offender and left. Story 84. Moved in with my boyfriend. Don't worry, I married him at 22. He left this life in March 2024. We were together for 38 years. Story 85. Went to Woodstock with a pound of marijuana, a lot of alcohol, and a bucket of pills, along with 7 other crazy people like me. I only remember about 1/3 of the time we spent there. I think we had fun. Story 86. The night of my 18th birthday, I got my wrist pierced. I was very drunk. The person piercing my wrist did not check for my identification and did not care that I was intoxicated. However, he warned me that under no circumstances should I go to the beach. He could not have been more clear about that. Honestly, the entire night is so fuzzy except for the part where this man looked me in the eyes and told me not to go to the beach. Immediately following that, my friends and I were drinking at the beach. The next thing I remember is waking up in a pile of my own vomit. I had forgotten about the piercing at first and freaked out a little when I saw a small bar through the top of my arm. Also, it got horribly infected and my body rejected it, most likely because I went to the beach and also slept in vomit. Story 87. Broke into a nearby high school's pool. My friends climbed up and crawled in through a window, then rappelled down and opened the door. Story 88. My friends and I collected dressers and pallets from the side of the road. Then we put them in a pile in their backyard, poured gasoline on top, and set them on fire. The fire was so hot that it melted the siding on their house. Story 89. I was a very sheltered child when I discovered alcohol and marijuana at 18. I did a lot of foolish things. I think objectively the dumbest was accepting a dare to climb part of a ropes course, absolutely intoxicated, with no harness. Have you ever seen those giant ladders? Basically, it's a big rope ladder where each rung starts about 4 feet apart, and each subsequent rung is further apart than the last. It's meant to be done as a pair, building teamwork. A friend said it looked hard. I replied, I could do that solo. They dared me, so I did. Granted, I cheated by grabbing the cable on the side, but I still did it all the way to the top solo. Story 90. Had intimate relations with my girlfriend in an elevator in the parking garage of the airport. We had no real reason to be at the airport. We just went there pretty late at night to pass the time. We figured out that we could pry the doors of the elevator apart, and it would stop between floors, so we just took advantage of the situation. This was the second craziest place I had intimate relations. Story 91. This happened today. I cheated death by about 50 feet. I was approaching a railroad crossing and couldn't see the lights flashing because the sun was in my eyes. The sun visor didn't help much. By the time I was nearing the crossing, I heard a train horn and realized it was too late for me to stop. So, I floored it, and as I crossed the tracks, I looked to my right to see the train barreling towards me. If I had left my house a second or two later, I would have probably been dead. Story 92. I filled my face with a whole bunch of snacks, then had a birthday dinner, and I don't remember the rest since I was recovering from a cold. I turned 18 in 2020, a month before the lockdown. It doesn't sound that crazy, but I occasionally think back to how much I ate that day. Story 93. I drank half a bottle of vodka neat with no mixer. I do not recommend it. It went as well as you might expect. Story 94. Committed multiple felonies and did not get caught. I did not realize how much trouble I could have gotten into until a year later. Story 95. Covering a basketball in Germex, lighting it on fire, and trying to see who could make a basket with it on fire. Story 96. Started using heroin after years of pill abuse and then quit without rehabilitation because of a pregnancy scare. Story 97. I forged my dad's signature on my college applications because he sent me to my home country to apply a loan with applications that required parental consent. I turned 18 3 months later. This was 21 years ago. Story 98. Picked a cheap room in which to live and moved alone with no help, taking hours-long trips, 3 hours each way, on public transportation. I am proud of my old self and I wish I were still that brave. I guess I could stand to take a page from my 18-year-old self. Story 99. I almost had an intimate encounter in a mall bathroom for my first time with my male best friend. We do not communicate anymore. Story 100. Drove 3 hours to my college town because I was home for the summer to take my girlfriend at the time to lunch because she said she missed me. Then I drove 3 hours back that same day after we were done. I was a hopeless romantic to the core coming out of high school. Story 101. My friend and I took two criminals we met at a bar in Quebec back to our dorm and did not sleep with them. Story 102. I organized a toga party at my high school. The principal brought me into the office and said if he saw me in a toga that Friday, he was going to suspend me. On the morning of the party, almost everybody was in a toga, including most of the teachers and counselors. I had mine in my back seat, so I quickly put it on, and it was hilarious all day watching him seethe. Let's just say he and I didn't get along too well. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.